Okay, I'm getting the thumbs up that we're live. Welcome, whether you're here or online. Start out with tonight, I have some good news and maybe some not so good news, depending on your perspective on things. I discovered this week in sort of parceling out what it's going to take to finish Luke by the end of March. And up until a couple of days ago, I was operating on the basis that there were 4 Wednesday nights in March. Okay, and we are roughly on a track to finish that. Reality is there are 5 Wednesdays in March. So if I don't get done and we need another week, that's sort of good news. If you're tired of me and you're wanting somebody else up here knowing that it might go for 3 weeks instead of 2 may not be such good news. But anyway, I think what's going to happen is we're going to talk about the crucifixion tonight. We're going to talk about the resurrection next week. And then the last week, I'll come up with something. I got a couple of ideas for either a standalone or a wrap-up of this, but we are, in fact, getting close to the end. We're going to start tonight in Luke chapter 23 and verse 26. This week and next week, as we go through this, in a lot of ways, we're so familiar with all of this, and we've read the various gospel accounts, and I don't know that I will make any points that you haven't already heard before in some manner or form, but we're going to go through it. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to harmonize the different gospel accounts. We will do a little bit of that. There are a couple of places where I think it's helpful to talk about what the other gospels talk about. But we're going to do this sort of like we've been doing the whole study, that this is a gospel written by Luke, presumably a Gentile, the only Gentile author in the New Testament, writing to another Gentile, perhaps a Roman official, and communicating the gospel to him, as well as writing a gospel in the years before serious Christian persecution in the 60s, and at a time when the church is converting Gentiles and on the road to becoming predominantly Gentile. And we've pointed out various places in the study where what Luke has chosen to tell and the way that he's chosen to tell it fits that audience. And I think it's still true as we look at the crucifixion and the resurrection. But again, there are a couple of places where I'll refer to some things that are in other Gospels. But let's start reading. In verse 26, it says, as they led him away, Jesus has been tried, and which reminds me of something I meant to mention. I posted on Facebook on the BACC member page the slides that I showed last week, and I added a couple of slides in there. One of the slides that's in there that you might want to take a look at is where I take a timeline of time as reckoned by us, and time as recognized by the Jews, and time as recognized by the Romans, and how those line up with each other, and how you can see how they differ, where they start the day and where they end the day, and how they reckon time. But I've also put at the bottom of it sort of a timeline of things that are happening. The arrest, the trial, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and showed some actual times of day that those occurred. Most of that information has come from this book that I have touted several times, Prelude to Glory by Wayne Leeper. It's based on information that's in there. Any errors that are in that chart are mine, because I've taken stuff that he's got there and tried to put it in a graphic format. But there's some interesting things that pop out from that. You might want to take a look at it. You will see quickly that it presumes what we talked about earlier, that most likely Jesus celebrated the Passover on the date that originally the Israelites celebrated the Passover, and everybody else was celebrating it a day later on what had become the tradition by the time that Jesus was there. So It's morning. Trial probably happened about 8 in the morning, early. It's about 9 now as they cart him away to be crucified. It appears from the various accounts that the trial before the Sanhedrin, before they took him to Pilate, was not all of the members of the Sanhedrin. That it is quite likely that neither Joseph of Arimathea or Nicodemus was there, because it appears from the accounts that it was a unanimous vote to condemn him, to condemn Jesus, and to take him to Pilate. So at any rate, that's happened. Pilate has tried to free him. As we talked at length last week, Pilate was in a tough position. He had 2 strikes against him, and the potential, if he blew this situation, for them to go to Rome and have him removed. And so he finally caves and gives in and turns Jesus over to be crucified. In verse 26, it says, as they led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, blessed are the barren women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it's dry? We asked a question a couple of weeks ago when there was somebody who was named in the account. Why does Luke here name Simon the Cyrene? Why doesn't he just say, Jesus had trouble carrying the cross, so they grabbed this guy off the street and had him carry it for them? But he says, no, they grabbed Simon of Cyrene. Jim.
Just my initial thought is Luke is he's writing from a historian. I mean, he's a doctor, but he's giving a very factual, detailed account. So I think it's logical that if he knows the name, he's going to put the name in there.
It's a detail, okay? And the more details you put in an account, the more reliable, the more credible. But what's another reason that you might name somebody in an account?
People would recognize him and ask him if that was really happened.
Okay, somebody knows him. Okay, Luke perhaps knows him. The people reading this gospel perhaps know him. Look over in Mark chapter 15, a couple of passages that are real interesting, and you probably have heard these before. Look in Luke chapter 15 and verse 21. It says, a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country. Okay, so here Mark not only names Simon, he names his sons, which seems kind of overkill for detail. Again, there is a fairly large amount of thought that Mark was writing his gospel to the church in Rome. And so he's writing and he says, Simon. He grabs Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Like, you guys know his dad. Okay? There is the likelihood that Alexander and Rufus are Christians. There is the likelihood that Simon, as a result of his, and we'll talk more about Simon in a minute, as a result of this event and seeing what all went on and looking into it, wound up being converted. Look over in Romans chapter 16. If you think that's just one sort of, that's kind of an odd reference. In Romans chapter 16, let me find the verse. Verse 13, it's the end of the chapter where Paul is saying, tell all these folks hello, encourage them in this way, honor them for their service. In verse 13, he says, greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, who's been a mother to me too. So you got Mark writing a gospel that was likely addressed to the church in Rome, referring to Rufus and Alexander, and you got Paul writing his epistle to the Romans, say, hey, greet Rick, tell Rufus hello. And so, the potential there for there to be impact, for Simon to have become our brother, I think is not very far-fetched at all. Why was Simon there? It says we've read a couple of accounts here where it says he was just kind of passing through. Okay. What is it that every Jew, no matter where they were in the world, wanted to do one time in their life before they died?
Next year in Jerusalem.
Go to Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover. It's the number one bucket list item. I don't know if they had bucket lists back then, but they had buckets, all right? But that was it. That was like, if I could pick something that I wanted to do before I died, that's what I want to do. So here he is from Cyrene. He's from out of town. Perhaps they're realizing the fulfillment of the wish of a lifetime. I'm here for the Passover. This is going to be great. It's going to be such a spiritual high. And then he gets nabbed to carry the cross of Jesus. Again, I think that, to me, that feeds into the narrative that it has a tremendous impact on him, and he winds up being our brother. Now, admittedly, I'm speculating here. There's another aspect of this. I just read about it today, and I've never thought about this. Why was it the Romans made folks who were going to be crucified carry their own cross and parade them through? It's not just, okay, we got to get from there to there. We don't want to do the hard work, so you're going to carry it over there. They didn't take the most direct route. They paraded whoever it was around town dragging their cross and carrying it. Why did they do that? Matt?
I got to think that an extreme punishment is also half deterrent.
Okay. All right. Deterrent. Okay. Other thoughts about why the Romans would do that, Renee?
To show their authority
Okay.
and their ability to not only punish but also to humiliate during the process.
Okay. Shame. Okay. What did parading around carrying a cross signify? They had been found what? Guilty. It was a sign of guilt. Okay. See this guy? Oh, that guy is guilty. Look what he's doing. No question, he's guilty. Romans have found him guilty. Was Jesus guilty? And so he didn't have to carry his cross. I don't know if you ever thought about that by Simon carrying his cross, the folks that everybody said was guilty was not guilty, didn't have to carry his cross. To me, it's just one more detail of the perfection of how God has worked through the ages for his plan. And, maybe I'm making more out of that than it is, but, it was something new that I had not thought about before. And Jesus, how's Jesus feeling at this point? Is he going, get the thing off of me, that's, is he doing okay? He's been beaten, he's been scourged, he's been spit on, he's been mocked, and there's more of that coming. And so how is he going to the cross? Oh man, I can't believe this happened. Oh no, what? No, what does he do?
I would think if the Garden of Gethsemane is any indication, it was probably a painful,
Okay.
very sad event
Okay.
for him.
He stepped across the threshold. In the Garden of Gethsemane, it's like, okay, it's coming.
It's coming.
God, if there's a way to take this cup from
Right.
me, do that. But now that bridge has been crossed. He's on his way to the cross. So there is some sense, I think, of resolution. That I don't feel great. I have not been treated well. This is going to get worse. But what do these verses say that he did on the way? I would have thought.
He warned these women that hard times were coming.
He's
So even
comforting.
on his way to the cross, he's still doing the work of the Father.
Okay, I would have thought you'd jumped on that right away. He's comforting these women. He's turned to these women. It's interesting in the Gospel of Luke, and it's really true throughout the New Testament, but that the discussions and the situations that you find women in, particularly in the Gospel of Luke, is just so different from the times and the culture and the age. There is a value, there is an importance. We're going to see them who are not allowed to be witnesses in court be the first witnesses of the resurrection. Can you think of a single woman in the New Testament, and particularly in the Gospels, who's ever described as an enemy of Jesus? And you go to the Old Testament, you got your Jezebels, you got all that stuff going on. But just think about in the Gospels, women are never mentioned in a negative light. In fact, they're honored and treated in a way that's better than anybody around them is treating any women. And you're going to see as we read through this, particularly here at the end, with the death and the resurrection, they're going to pop up and play important roles. And as Jesus is going to the cross, it's not, oh, woe is me. I can't believe I decided to do this. Okay? Man, this is going to be tough. You guys need to pray for me, okay? It's, help me get through this. He's turning and he's comforting, saying, it's going to be okay. Okay? What you really need to be mourning is there's bad stuff coming. And you need to pray for yourself for deliverance from that.
You sort of just answered my question. I see Jesus prophesying and teaching. If I was a woman, I don't know that would be comforting to me, what he just said, but you just addressed it.
Okay. And we talked about it last week when pretty sure he's talking about when the Romans are going to siege Jerusalem in AD 70 and how horrible it becomes. And we talked a little bit about that last week, and I'm not going to, I've got an account here from Josephus. It's just, I didn't want to read it out loud. It's so horrible. Okay? But he's on the way to the cross. He's comforting and looking out for those around him. He's going to be on the cross, and he's going to tell John to take care of his mom. And just, tremendous things that the Son of God is doing as he's sacrificing himself. And in all of the gospel accounts, it really is a situation where Jesus is laying his life down. Pilate wasn't in control. Caiaphas wasn't in control. The Sanhedrin wasn't in control. Judas didn't make it happen. Okay? Jesus could have walked out of it. He could have walked away from it. But he didn't, because he laid his life down for us. Let's read a little further. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, he saved others. Let him save himself if he's the Christ of God, the chosen one. The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." And there was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." Okay. I think Luke is the only one who talks about the thief on the cross. How today is the story of the thief on the cross most often used? Okay, Tim says you don't have to be baptized. See there, Jesus told me it's going to be in paradise. You don't have to be baptized. Is anybody being baptized right now? Pentecost hadn't come. Resurrection hadn't happened. Ain't nobody being baptized. And this guy's going to be dead by the time Pentecost comes around. So it's not a real good comparison. Okay? And if you're going to use that same logic, when Jesus says just a few verses earlier about the soldiers and the people who are mocking and teasing, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Well, I guess they're saved too. I mean, if you're going to use the same logic, Jesus said that. He told God to forgive them. So you got to be careful how you pull things. You know, you grab things and you pull them out of context. And then, of course, Hebrews 9 talks about, and I think in support of the fact that Jesus hadn't died yet, it talks about, you know, if you have a will, if the person who has the will hadn't died yet, it's not in effect. Okay? So Pentecost hasn't come. The gospel is not being preached, and people being called to repent and being baptized for the forgiveness of their sins. So it just doesn't work logically. Okay? Now the idea behind it is there's nothing this criminal could do to save himself, and there's nothing we can do to save ourselves. Okay? Baptism is not a shower, washing the dirt, as Peter says, but it saves us because it's an appeal to God for a clear conscience. Okay? So you've got this situation. I don't want to talk any more about it, okay? There's too much talk about that now. We got other things to talk about. What is the worst thing that somebody could say to you? Okay? No four-letter words here, okay? But just think about something mean that somebody could say to you. What's the meanest thing somebody could say to you? All right, Renee.
That I'm not a Christian.
Okay, that you're not a Christian?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That you're no.
You're a loser.
You're a loser, okay? Any other thoughts? Things that would just cut you and hurt you.
You know, if somebody were to say I was incompetent,
Okay, all right. Isn't that what they're saying to Jesus? If you're the Son of God, come on down. You saved others, you can't even save yourself. I mean, reality is that I think that's about the meanest thing, the hardest thing that anybody could say to Jesus. Okay? And what would we do when somebody calls us a loser? What do we do? Oh, joke them out? Okay. All right, Tyler.
We get defensive.
We get defensive. Well, look what you did, okay? Or look what you didn't do. Or, I'm not a loser, I did that. You're the Son of God who was there at the creation of the universe. You got power like nobody's business. And people are saying the absolute most ugly things that challenge you to the very core of who you are. And Jesus doesn't respond. Okay? Jeannie.
When Jesus was being tempted, Satan did it all 3 times.
Okay.
If you're the Son of God.
Okay?
If you're the Son of God. But
Certainly
he knew
there-
very well who he
Okay.
was.
Okay. Certainly there are echoes of the temptations of Jesus early in the Gospels. Okay? Jesus probably recalled those, you know. So, they didn't give in then. I'm not giving in now. I got a mission. I got something to do here. Okay? It says that they offered him wine mixed with wine vinegar. Okay? You look in some of the other accounts, there's kind of a couple of offerings of things to drink, and the first time it's wine, I think, with myrrh in it. And it was intended, that apparently was often offered to crucifixion victims to ease the pain, just kind of stupor them up a little bit. You know, I don't know what you call that, merciful. But it was something that was done. Jesus said, nope, I'm going through this clear-headed. You know, I'm not taking any kind of easy road out here. I am going to be fully cognizant and in my capabilities as I lay my life down. Okay. Later, he's thirsty, and they offer him some wine mixed with vinegar, and I think that's what this is referring to here. And then it says that there was a sign, this is King of the Jews. It's interesting, Luke doesn't go into all the details of the Jews going complaining to Pilate, and Pilate puffing up and saying, no, I've written what I've written. Again, he's writing to a Gentile audience. There's no need to go into that. One interesting exercise is go through the 4 Gospels and read what the sign says. In each gospel, it says something a little bit different. And it's possible to read that and come away with it like, what? They can't get their facts straight. But if you look at what the wording is on the 4 signs, there is no conflict, because it's just the different accounts don't necessarily say all the words that are on the sign. Okay? One gospel says, this is Jesus, King of the Jews. This just says, this is the King of the Jews. Does that mean it didn't say Jesus? It just means, the point was, the sign, the thing attesting to his crime, his guilt, just said he's the King of the Jews. That was the point. If you look at all 4 of them, they actually line up very well, and there's not a conflict there. Tyler.
Considering that they would have all been writing this stuff from memory, or in the case of Luke, secondhand knowledge reports, it makes sense that there would be some slight differences in phrasing while still saying basically the same thing.
Okay. Well, yes, but in this case, their memory is not faulty. Okay. Matthew said, I wasn't going to do this, but let's go ahead and do it. Matthew says, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Okay. Mark says, the sign just said, the King of the Jews. Is there a conflict there? No, there's not. Tim.
It was written in a couple of different languages as well.
Yeah.
It might have been exact quotes. One's an Aramaic quote, one's a Greek
Okay.
quote. So.
Okay. All right. Luke says, this is the King of the Jews. Again, those words are on the sign, and they don't necessarily conflict with what Matthew and Mark said. And John says he doesn't have the this is, he just has the Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. So again, if you're wanting to find fault, they don't say the same thing. But these are 4 different guys. These are 4 witnesses to a car accident standing on different corners, and they're describing the same accident, and it's the same accident. And their stories jibe with each other, but they're from a little different perspective, and they're communicating something a little bit different. Okay? But there's no conflict that's there. All right, let's get back to Luke. Now it was about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. For the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. And Jesus called out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, surely this was a righteous man. And when all the people who had gathered to witness the sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. Similar to what and we're not going into the detail here, but similar to what we just talked about with the sign, the different Gospels record different things that Jesus said. And it's not that they got it wrong, it's just for the purposes of the Gospels that they, and the audience they were writing to, they emphasized different things that Jesus said while he was on the cross. Yes, back in the back.
That's why it's so important to study the scriptures, and when you study with somebody, point that out. When I study with somebody, I like to show them,
Okay.
the sign on the cross, to get clear that the Bible is written comprehensively and non-comprehensively.
Yep.
And explain what that means. Comprehensive, exact, and non-comprehensive, because, when you get with somebody from a different denomination who's been taught, something different, but they don't really know how to read the Bible. They're sincere about what was told them, but somebody didn't teach them all. Like, to get the full story of the gospel, you got to read
Sure.
all 4 gospels to really get a good picture as to what actually happened.
It's the beauty of it. And maybe the clearest example is you've got the Gospel of Matthew, written by Matthew, a Jew, to a Jewish audience who have a rich history and understanding of the law of Moses and all of the traditions and all of the activities and all of the things that Jews did. And you've got Luke writing to a Gentile who maybe has very limited background on the law of Moses and the prophets and the prophecies and all that kind of stuff. You're not going to use the same stories. And you're not going to use the same level of detail between those two, because you're trying to communicate one thing to this audience. He was the fulfillment of the ages and all of these prophecies and all of these things from the old law that were a shadow of what was to come. Matthew wants to explain all that stuff. Luke, writing to Theophilus, he perhaps doesn't know any of that stuff. And that's not the point. It's the point that this happened, and I looked into it. Here's the details. Here are the nuts and bolts of what happened and why Jesus is, he's alive. The tomb is empty. Okay? You see the difference there. So anyway, it's about the 6 hours, noon. Okay? It's noon. And darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. You have probably read people speculate, well, isn't that wonderful? God arranged an eclipse. Okay? You can't have an eclipse at the Passover because it's tied to the phase of the moon. And the phase of the moon at the Passover doesn't allow for a solar eclipse. So what is this darkness? Matt?
Well, I think it's an act of God. It's not something that naturally occurred.
Okay. Maybe
Okay. Sure. I mean,
Okay.
I'm flexible here. Luke records it as an event that happened.
Okay.
But to someone who has read the rest of the Bible, you're thinking back to maybe the Egyptian, the Egyptians on the last day of the plagues, and it becomes night, and the firstborn is killed.
Okay. And that darkness is described as really dark. I mean, there's actually a quality put to it that they couldn't see their hand. I believe scriptures say they couldn't see their hands around their face. This doesn't say that. It just says it got dark. How dark is dark? How dark is dark? Okay. Is Okira's shirt, is it dark? Would you say his shirt is dark? Okay. I think it's dark. Okay. Is it as dark as my shirt? No, but it's still dark. Okay. How about Chet's shirt? Is Chet's shirt dark? Aloha's back there. Okay. All right.
Compared to my shirt.
Aloha, no, hang on to that. Aloha is shaking her head. Randy, stand up. Compared to Randy's shirt, is Chet's shirt dark? Yes. Okay. Okay. Any of you guys remember a couple of weeks ago, we had a Monday where it just rained all day. I mean, it rained. About a week before that, though, we had a day that was dark. I mean, we had to have the lights on in our house during the middle of the day. I don't think we ever got a drop of rain, but it was dark. If I had been driving, I would have had my headlights on. Okay? So, don't get tripped up by this stuff, thinking you got to have an eclipse, or you got to have some sort of, and certainly God had the power to make it dark. I don't want to take away from that at all. But it is a striking, however dark it was a striking enough dark that for 3 hours you didn't see the sun. Okay, I didn't see the sun all day that day. And it was noticeable. And there was a heaviness about the day. It was so dark.
I've never considered that, because I've always kind of saw it as this is an act of God, much like the temple curtain being torn, much
talk
like
about that in a minute.
much like the graves being opened and dead people walking around. I don't have any problem with God bringing darkness on the land when Jesus is hanging on the cross.
Yeah. I don't either. And in fact, one writer I was reading described it today is, and I don't think God was struggling here, but he described it as God struggling not to lash out at the people who were mistreating his son. Okay, there is deep anguish at every level of reality, spiritual and temporal, going on here. But it's dark, and it's dark enough that this is unusual at a time when there should have been great excitement, because we're approaching the climax of the Passover. Okay? Folks are getting ready. Close to 17,000 priests are getting ready to sacrifice lambs in the temple courtyards. Okay? Just think about that for a minute. That's just boggling. And it's dark. Yes?
I was just thinking, the week before, Jesus was coming in, and he used the nature of saying that the rocks and the hills would be screaming out if the people weren't, because it was a glorious time, and nature knew it, and this time nature
isn't
knows.
that interesting? That's interesting. And what is Romans? I think it's Romans where Paul says that that these were, nature is on tiptoe, longing to see the thing. I can't remember whether it's Roman or Hebrews. I'll look it up and bring. But it's this reference that creation is groaning in anticipation. Okay, good point.
I'd like to hear and understand more about why you said it could not have been an eclipse.
I'm going to let you go look that up. It has
okay.
to, and trust me, right now, I can't remember whether the Passover happens at the new moon or at the full moon, but whichever phase that it happens at, you can't have a solar eclipse at that time.
Okay. It's just that I read once in a science magazine where they claimed that in AD 33, when the Passover occurred, that there was an eclipse, and we're trying to use that to rationalize why they thought it was important.
It is interesting, the number of Bible commentaries that are reluctant to do what Tim just said. I don't have any problem with God causing darkness. He's got the power and the ability to do it. That they won't accept they try to explain every miracle of Jesus by some natural occurrence. And if they can't do that, then, there must be some fault in the telling of the story. Well, no, you're talking about the creator of the universe. Okay?
Likewise, I wouldn't have any problem with God using a natural event.
Yeah.
Either way,
Yeah.
I just believe it happened.
Yeah, I think in this case, at least from what I've read, that this darkness is not an eclipse. It's not just this, arranged. There are some things that are being arranged to coincide, and we'll talk about that maybe in just a minute. But there is darkness. People are noticing what is going on. You know, for all of the folks who shouted, "Crucify Jesus," early in the morning in front of Pilate, a lot of people are asleep. Didn't know what was going on, and they wake up, and you know, it's the Passover and going, and man, it's dark. And then, when Jesus dies, the curtain in the temple is ripped. Now, I point back here. This little alcove right here is about 20 feet high by about 16 feet wide. Okay? One estimate that I read is that the curtain between the holy place and the Holy of Holies was perhaps that wide, but 60 feet high.
Wow.
So 3 times that height, thick. You know, to have a curtain that big, it's not that little lacy doily thing, you know, you've got over your kitchen window, you know, that you can see through. This is, probably inches thick. The force that it would take to rip that in half. You're talking about miracle, act of God. This is where we need to be pointing to. God is acting here. And what is, let's go ahead and, all right, let's do Jeannie and then over here and then we'll move on.
I hate to go back to that
Okay.
sun shining thing, but when the Word of God says something, the Word of God speaks. And I don't think anybody, especially in the church, should just wonder why, the world does it, but it says it stopped shining. It didn't shine less, it stopped shining. So that's it. He spoke.
Well, I think that the curtain ripping like that is probably one of the most underrated things mentioned. You talk about the thickness of it and what it would take, but really and truly, what's on the other side of that curtain is incredible power. And if you go beyond that curtain and you're not authorized, you're going to die.
Okay?
To me, having something like that happen is analogous to today, like having a nuclear leak at a power, something of devastating magnitude just got unleashed, by that happening and what that meant.
And this is in the temple again. Everybody is amassing at this point, and I believe this is happening at the time that Jesus dies, 3 p.m., which is also the time that's slated for them to start killing the Passover lambs. Okay. Now, I think I said a week ago that I somehow tied in the Day of Atonement with the time that Jesus died. That is incorrect, okay? And if I said that, I was wrong. The Day of Atonement was actually in September, October. This was the sacrifice of the Passover lambs for the various families relative to remembering their deliverance from Egypt. And Jesus dies at the time that is starting, where about 17,000 priests are going to be killing what may be 250,000 lambs, each representing 10 people who are going to eat that lamb. I mean, this is big. And the curtain is ripped in two, and it's dark. And of course, there are reports of dead people. I mean, this is, to me, when I go to the book of Acts and I read about in chapter 7 or 8 where the persecution has started with Christians, there's a chapter that just sort of ends, kind of says almost nonchalantly, and a great number of priests became obedient to the faith. I think it's, you think? Folks who are as trained and wanting to be spiritual, however misguided and legalistic that they were, who were there for the darkness and were there for the curtain that was ripped in two. And now the word is Jesus is alive. If they didn't come around and go, whoa, what did we do? What did we do? We had the Messiah. You know, just hope you're getting a flavor of this. This is not happening over in a corner. And nobody's really noticing what's going on. It's in front of everybody. And it's cataclysmic. Not only in a physical sense, it's certainly cataclysmic in terms of our spiritual condition and what God is doing and Jesus are doing for us here.
Do you think this tearing of the curtain was the beginning of the establishment of the kingdom of heaven?
I don't know I would use that phrase. The phrase I would use is the curtain's been torn and access to the Father by everybody is coming. It's no longer just Jesus is now our high priest. You know, you look at, we've been studying Hebrews in our Monday night Zoom class. And that whole middle section of Hebrews that we read through and we kind of, you know, it gets real tedious because he's going back and forth about it. It's all about the fact of trying to convince Jews who have become Christians, who are undergoing a difficult time and wanting maybe to turn back and go back. You know, how hard it is for us to give up something that we've lived with all our life, to just bombard them with 3 or 4 chapters. Why in the world would you going to go back? Because you've got something so much better. And at the center of that is the fact that Jesus is now our high priest. And because of that, we have direct access to God, which the Jews never had. It always had to be through the priest. It always had to be who had to take care of himself before he could even begin to do something for the people. That's all gone. The curtain is ripped.
Do you think this signified the end of the law of Moses?
I'm not sure what you're getting at, because there are all kinds of word games that can be played with. Well, did it start here? Did it start on Pentecost? Did it start when people started getting baptized? It's kind of splitting hairs. Yeah. I just don't get wrapped around the axle about that. I think the need, the ability to access God other than through the Holy of Holies, which he had set up as a shadow and as a forerunner of what was coming. Jesus is now our high priest. So I'll let the theologians split the hairs. Jeannie?
When you think of the covenant of the law of the Old Testament, anyway, ends with Jesus' last breath. I mean, because he fulfilled, didn't he fulfill the law and the prophets and all of that?
There is no need for sacrifice. Jesus has been the perfect sacrifice.
Right.
So there is no need for a high priest to go into the Holy of Holies with another sacrifice. There is no need for, that's done with. Now, whether you want to call that the coming of the kingdom or the beginning of the church, or that gets into all kinds of semantics. It's the perfect sacrifice has been made. There's no longer a need for a curtain. It's just not needed. Okay. All right, we're out of time. I almost got through his burial, so next we got the crucifixion. We'll do the burial and the resurrection next week. Thanks. Good comments, good discussion. I hope this has been encouraging to you. Let's close with a prayer. God, we come to you tonight on the basis of what we've read about tonight, that Jesus has been our perfect sacrifice, that our sins have been taken away, and that he's seated at your right hand and advocating for us. And because of that, we can approach you directly, and we can approach you in his name with confidence and bold, knowing that you care for us and knowing that you hear us. Help us to really believe that, live lives that are in accordance with that. that you will bless our days tomorrow and the folks that we're around, the way we behave, things that we say. Give us good rest tonight, a safe trip home. Be with those among us that need your healing. Think about Lenora and George and Gary and others that we've been praying for. Just strengthen, encourage, and heal them. And we thank you for our body here and the chance to come together tonight and study your word. And we pray in your Son's name. Amen.